Hi, Laura here, and I want to ask you, do you know the difference between a wound and a scar? Well, from a inner healing perspective, the difference is that a scar we can see and we can remember, but we don't feel the pain of that any longer. Whatever that incident was, we can remember or not remember, but we have the evidences that something happened. But when we're resharing the story or remembering the story, there's no psyche pain attached to it. The other side of the coin is a wound. A wound is something that has not yet healed. It hasn't had the opportunity to become a scar yet. Well, I talk about these differences because as a coach, I often am working with a client who wants to work through some inner healing issues. And a part of my work is to recognize in their conversations what is a scar and what is a wound. Well, I pick up on what's a wound, and you probably do too, usually because of the emotions that get stirred up. For instance, they could just be sharing something that seems like a simple story, but by the use of their language, usually very dramatic, even though their emotions seem very calm, so it'd be the vocabulary that becomes very dramatic. Or haven't we all seen when like somebody's telling a story and then all of a sudden their eyes fill with tears, or you can tell that they want to cry, but they just keep telling their story? Well, a part of the work is for me to understand that right there, now there's a wound. And you know what's so interesting is that often we don't in ourselves take the time to look at a wound. We don't often take the time to say, why is that bringing me to a place of tears? And certainly we don't often interrupt other people to ask them that very important question, like, what was that? Like, why did that almost make you cry? See, these are the important, crucial conversations that we could be having, are usually not having. Um, and it's important to talk about these things because we all bear scars. And the truth is, we all bear wounds. But you know, it is the Lord's desire for us that our wounds would become scars. What I mean by that is that our wounds would become healed to the place that they would be scarred over. We could see them, we could remember them, we could talk about them, and there wouldn't be this visceral pain. There wouldn't be this reliving of the emotions. And you know, the reason I'm so eager to do this work, the reason I find it such a privilege to do this work and have for so many years with people is number one, I've gone through it and have continued to go through it for many years. And number two is because I know there's liberation. I know there's freedom on the other side of that pain. I also know that we have an enemy of our soul, and he likes to be able to pull on the strings, you might say, of those unhealed wounds. And they continue to keep us in a very small place emotionally. They keep us in a small place spiritually. They keep us in a small place relationally. Why? Because when we're living out of our pain, number one, we don't trust. Number two, we don't let others in. And this is a problem because we were created by our amazing designer, our creator. Jehovah is his name, to be in fellowship and to be able to let people in. We were created for intimacy. And you know, woundedness shuts down intimacy. It shuts down community. Hello, I know all about that. In fact, I wrote my first book, The Master Gardener, after having gone through a very deep, one of the deepest I'd ever had at that point, inner healing with the Lord. And this inner healing was on the heels of Father's Day, as I was, for the billionth time, confronted with the sorrow, the anguish, the loss of my earthly father. And with it was also all the toxic emotions of having felt rejected and abandoned and all those things that happen to our human soul. And you know, what happened is that by the Lord's design, and I want you to know that God is always the one who is behind our seasons of healing. So I always say, don't go poking around at the wounds, right? Unless you invite the Lord in. But he's really good about showcasing these wounds that are hidden in plain sight, but they are affecting our relationships and our lives. So, this particular Father's Day, all of these emotions came rising back up as the church, the pastors were talking about fathers and Father's Day and how our fathers, are the picture of God. And it just put me in such a funk, a deep, dark funk. And I remember going home and I remember laying down and the overwhelming blackness and sorrow and loss began to just to descend on me once again. And I'll never forget my Mr. Wonderful was laying beside me by God's design. And I was doing my best to push all of those toxic emotions back down. Well, you've probably spent some time in your life doing the same thing. You've probably spent time pushing down very painful negative emotions. But what's so interesting about this particular time is that while I'm trying to push the dragon back into the prison cell, I heard this thought in my mind, which was, why would you push it down, Laura? And at that exact moment, Mr. Wonderful said to me, maybe you shouldn't be trying to push it down. Maybe you should be letting it go. Wow. Well, between hearing that in my own mind and hearing that, from my husband, I realized it was time to really release and shed that pain. And I have to tell you, it was that day and a few other events that the Lord allowed me to go through that I went through such a very deep inner healing. And one thing about a God-led inner healing is we're never the same afterwards. And that's a good thing. And so I understand what it's like to be trapped in a place of sorrow. We can be very successful in many areas of our life, but in that area, we can still be held prisoner. And, I've gone on to understand this weird dynamic that we have when it comes to the emotions is that we keep trying to shove down our emotions that are toxic. But everything else in our life and everything else in our body knows that if I eat something toxic, I'm supposed to what? Let's just be real. I'm supposed to vomit it. I'm supposed to get it out. Well, this is a lot of what happens in the hearts of many people, including myself, is that instead of times when I should have emotionally vomited, and by that, for me, I don't mean going off on the cashier at Publix. I don't mean screaming at your children. That's how we often do it, but that's not healthy, it's not healing, and it's certainly not holy. What I mean by emotional vomiting is I mean to get into the presence of the Lord. I mean to cry out that pain. I mean to give a voice to that pain. Because here's one thing that I am firmly a believer in, and that is most people have not come onto the other side of their pain because they've actually never addressed the pain. Now, I'm not saying that they haven't talked about the pain to somebody. I'm talking about that they've never addressed it. And especially from the perspective of the age they were when it happened. So for instance, when I'm working with an inner healing client and we need to address a unresolved grief, very important, an unresolved grief, an unhealed sorrow, right? An unhealed wound. What I encourage is for them to speak from the age that they were. In other words, don't address that pain from the age that you are now, right? Because then you would be addressing that pain with an adult mindset. But see, the 9-year-old, the 5-year-old, the 16-year-old, that was the one who has been holding all of that pain, all of that anguish, all of that rage. And they need a voice. I tell you, it may sound crazy to you, but this stuff is truth and it works. And so I help people to understand that they not only have the right, but they have the responsibility to address this pain so that they can grieve it. We need to grieve those things that have been ungrieved. Why? So that there can be healing, so that there can be release, so that there can be freedom. And this has been a game changer. For myself, it's been a game changer for my clients. For those that need to get free of the past that continues to haunt them, that continues to have control over them. I love to tell anyone who will listen, you were made in the image and the likeness of God. Your Heavenly Father is a speaking spirit, and He gave you something very, very, very priceless, and it's called your voice. And do you know that it's the one thing that people and the enemy himself has been coming after from the time you were young? In other words, when you were crying as a child, people were trying to get you to not cry. Stop crying, or I'll give you something to cry about. Never did understand that one. There's this call to be silent, but I'm not saying we shouldn't use our words measured and carefully, but I want you to understand that if your voice was withheld from you, a priceless gift was withheld. What we should have been trained is how to use our voice in a way that does not maim, but it actually sets other people free, beginning with ourselves. So the difference between a wound and a scar is that you can recognize in yourself and you can recognize in others that while they're sharing something, that emotions come up. And if not emotions, because some people have gotten so good about masking their emotions, their language will become, I don't want to say ridiculous in the way that it's like they're like a clown. No, ridiculous in that it's a ridiculous use of a word that they would use because it's so off the charts dramatic. That tells me, as an inner healing coach, right? That tells me that there's something going on in that area that if they are willing, then we're going to go into that place. Why? So that a greater level of freedom can be done. I love this work of coaching. I see myself as a spiritual coach more than anything else, because when we can really unveil the beauty and the truth of our Heavenly Father, then we can begin to unveil the truth of who we are and whose we are. I see myself as a transformative coach. I see myself as a lifestyle coach because, we all need encouragement, edification, and challenge in any area of our life. It doesn't matter if it's in the area of aging. I get that. I've been on that journey myself. And so I'm able to help coach my clients through this process of embracing aging. Sometimes that they need a coach going through grief. Well, girlfriends, can I tell you, I have been through some grief and I've learned some things along the way. And so for many years, I've been able to help coach people through grief. There is so many wonderful things that God has available for us. My goal is always to help people live as absolutely free and as absolutely full as they can. If you spend any time with me, you know that my life's mission, summed up in 9 words, is to, inspire others to get unstuck so that they can live full. And when I say full, I mean beautiful, prayerful, joyful, playful. There's so many fulls that God has available for us. And I love the mission of Jesus. Says that He came to set the captives free. Well, I know that freedom is a great thing. I'm desiring more and more of it in my life all the time, and I love being invited into the life of those who are looking to become more free. If you are interested in this conversation of inner healing, I invite you to check out my Facebook page, Laura Donnie, Dahne. If you're interested in the book I wrote, The Master Gardener, it's an allegory, which means it's a short story that is a made-believe story, but it's telling you truths. And it's set in a garden. And it's about how a gardener finds that her garden will not produce. But then one day, an unexpected guest shows up and begins to show her that what's going on in that garden of hers has more to do with her than any outside forces. Well, I encourage you to check in the show notes and to get that book for yourself or for someone else so that they can go deeper and yet, I like to say, paradoxically higher in the things of God, in God Himself, and in a greater depth of freedom. So, love you. Be blessed. I want you to have a beautiful day. And in fact, I want you to have a beautiful life. God bless you.